In the spring of 1991, I traveled to Romania to adopt my son, Joey. What I learned during that journey and what I have learned in the next 28 years that I have been his mom and lived with him on his journey have been many things that have changed my life in many profound ways, in more ways that I could have even imagined. A popular news show at the time, 2020, had aired a segment about the orphans in Romania. The country at that time was in anarchy. They had a very difficult dictator who had really put all of the country in the shambles, politically and culturally. There was not even enough food for the people. They didn't even have water. Many children ended up being in orphanages and institutions because their families simply could not take care of them. We were put in contact with an agency that was placing children from Romania. Some families had went before us, but many of them had returned unsuccessfully. So we knew that it was important to work with an agency on this project. Shortly after they had talked with us, they called and said that there was a little 2-year-old boy that was available for adoption if we wanted to go. I'll never forget that morning when I left Chicago with antibiotics, food for him, and many, many more questions than I had answers. I just was very nervous and uncertain as to what was going to go on within that country. As I was there, I thought about, what is before me? Is this a good idea? I had 2 daughters that were at home, one daughter born to me biologically, and another daughter that was adopted. But I knew in my heart that it was really the right thing to do. I'll never forget the hospital when I went there, like what it looked like. It was just like this looming big building. And I got there and couldn't get in the door. The man said, sorry, this visiting hours are over, you can't come in. And I said, but I need to come in, I need to see my son. And he's like, well, if you've got a little alcohol or something you can give me. And I searched around in my pouch and found something, I can't remember what. But yeah, oh, that's interesting. Oh, a souvenir from Chicago, okay. So there I was, and I went into this very dark, dingy place. And as I walked into the room, I saw my son. He was sitting in a crib, all alone. His eyes were really big and brown, and he had this very, very sweet face. I loved him instantly. And as I went to pick him up, I could tell that he was hardly ever held. He was kind of stiff. It was not even a comfortable position for him. My heart just grew exponentially at that time. And I also felt so much gratitude to be there and to be able to hold him. My name is Ann Brown. I'm a registered nurse. I have a background in maternal child health. I presently have a practice where I assist children on the autism spectrum and their families with education, advocacy, help with their family situations, and overall just adjusting to life, living under the autism umbrella. I also am an interfaith minister and celebrant. My most important job, by far, is being a mom. I am the mother of 9 children, 8 of whom are adopted. When I was in country with my son, it was very interesting. We had many challenges, and especially with paperwork, getting everything together. Finding a visa was a really difficult challenge. Our government had stopped visas, had stopped processing visas for kids that were going to from Romania at that time. So it looked for a while that I may have to come back home and then go back to the country for the visa. So this was a very trying time. Luckily, for the only time in my life, I had a White House connection. And George Bush Sr. was president at that time. And he was very instrumental in writing a letter to our embassy to be able to get a visa for my son. There were many angels that came together to help in that process. First and foremost, my son's father. When I was in country with Joey, he was not able to walk. Even though he was 2 years old, he could not walk, and was actually very weak even in sitting, because he had lived his life first in a box in his own home and then in a crib in an institutional setting, never coming out. I remember working with him with a chair, and after several falls of, kind of going like a little walker, going with his chair, he finally, began to take some of the first steps on his own. He did not have language. He made sounds, and for some reason, the sound that he made was dooga-dooga. I don't know why he made that sound. I don't know what that sound meant to this day. And my facilitator there, Heather, who was an amazing support, and I couldn't have made it through without her, and she was only 18 years old. So she was a phenomenal person, a phenomenal angel in the situation. And she coined him the name, the Dooga Dooga Boy. So yes, it was something. But we finally got everything together, and kind of began that process. Before we left the country, there was a doctor who examined him, and she looked at me and she said, your son has a lot of neurological issues, and it's probably better if you pick another child. And at that point, I just couldn't. I thought about it, but I just couldn't. And I went to another doctor for a second opinion. He headed the AIDS hospital for children in Bucharest at the time. And I'll never forget, as I walked into his office, there was a sign on the wall that said, "We have done so much for so long with so little that we can now do everything with nothing." He looked at me and saw the same things that the other doctor had seen. But he said, "He is your son. Just take him home and love him." Which is what, of course, did. It was a May day when we went home. The two girls at home were overjoyed to see us, finally home after 6 weeks of being there. Joey was later joined by four younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. So he is kind of one of the oldest in the group, and my oldest son. All 9 of my children have much courage and resiliency. I've always admired it, both with their talents and what they share in the world, but also what they have faced in terms of, the many challenges and hardships that they have faced. They have had educational difficulties. They have had ADD, hearing impairment, and emotional and mental health challenges, to name just a few. But despite all of that, they are always my inspiration. I've learned many things over the time that Joey has been mine. Now he's nearly 30 years old. There are many different things that I've learned, many things over these past nearly 30 years. The one thing that I have learned the most is that people with autism are incredibly spirited people. They have beautiful, loving spirits. For one thing, they're very authentic. What you see is what you get. They don't have that filter, which can sometimes be problems in society. It can be problems in public places sometimes, but there's something very refreshing about that. They don't have any interest in anything that's material. For Christmas or holidays, I never knew what to buy Joey. Like, what do I buy? So my other kids, and we've got like lists like this, And for Joe, it's like, what does he, because there is no interest in material. And you think in our world about how much, we look at material things and how appearances are so important. But for children on the spectrum, for children with autism, it really is not. They also are extremely intuitive. And one of the things that I had to really develop for myself was I had to strengthen my own intuitive gifts. Because my son is nonverbal, or non-speaking, as we now like to say, that intuition is very, very important, because many times that's the only way that I knew what he needed. I remember driving in the car with him, and I was lost, which was not a common occurrence in the days before GPS. I mean, how many people think that that's probably one of the greatest inventions of the century is the GPS? I was always lost, and I didn't want him to know. He could always feel how I felt about everything, and I didn't want him to know that I was feeling as stressed as I was. So as we're driving, I'm trying to hold it back. I'm trying to get composed, and he's behind me. He can't see my face, but he starts crying uncontrollably in the back seat. And from there, I realized that even though he could not see me, energetically, he could feel me. He could feel my emotions, and he started crying, as the way that I felt like crying at the time too. Finding a way to communicate for these children is very, very important. Temple Grandin talked about the autistic mind seeing in pictures. So a person with autism, they don't relate to the spoken word or something that's written the same as they do a picture. So many of his early communications were that, and they still are. His favorite way to communicate is still with pictures. He also uses rapid prompting method so that he taps on a keyboard to be able to spell out words and sentences. The trick is, though, is he will only do it sometimes, and for some people, when he feels like it. So it doesn't always work. So we have kind of a lot of different ways to communicate. There were a lot of beautiful professionals that were in our lives that have helped him through the years. But I have to say the most that I've learned is from other mothers. Other mothers. They have definitely been my lifeline many, many times. They helped me to be an advocate. If it weren't for other mothers and their support, I would not even be speaking to all of you here today. It's very, very important to stand together, to stand in community. Sometimes we would not be invited to other people's homes. People would say to me, you're invited, but does Joey have to come? And as heartbreaking as it was sometimes, I tried to understand that that's just where they were. That's just where their consciousness was. And one of the visions that I have is to help to increase the consciousness for people, to know what it is like to live under the spectrum umbrella, to know what it is like to be a mother, a father, or a sibling. I remember one of my friends helped me very much with the IEP. The IEP is, you read about it in developmental disability circles all the time. It's an educational plan that's very, very important for kids because it helps to set up the education that they're going to get or not get at school sometimes. And I remember one of my first meetings, I was very ready, kind of like this talk. I was really prepared. But when I stepped into the room, everything was it just melted away. I had books, I had knowledge, I had studied. I want to be an advocate for my son. I have to speak for my son who has no voice. And I just, in the middle of the meeting, as everyone started to talk, I just fell apart. I just started to cry inconsolably. The whole meeting was everybody's just like, everyone else starts almost to cry. So here, I'm supposed to be helping my son and being an advocate, and I'm crying the whole time. I felt like a failure. I felt like I can't do this. But I came to find out that I was chosen to do this, just as all of you are chosen to do something perhaps that's beyond your comfort zone, something that's really, really hard. You don't know how you're going to do it, but you can do it. Early intervention is very, very important for kids on the autism spectrum. Sometimes, though, all of our emphasis is on early intervention, and it's also important to realize that they become adults. My son now, at almost 30 years old, I'm working to find a place of living for him where he can live independently. I would like him to be able to have purpose in a job. He has to have a job coach. He cannot be on his own. But it's important for every person in the world to have purpose, regardless of what their challenges are. Through my years as a mom, there have been many triumphs as well as trials. The biggest thing, though, that I have learned is that it's important to walk the path with love and compassion. Love and compassion wins the day. It is so very important. My family is very, very precious to me. The most precious thing I could ever imagine. And I'm sure it's true for all of you here as well. My family inspires me every day to live a life of faith that is much bigger than my fears.